I had never missed my son's birthday, not through his mother's death, not through 3 jobs to pay for law school. But today he gave me the cruelest gift. Dad, the best present would be if you disappeared from my life forever. I smiled, kissed his forehead, and walked out of the penthouse I bought him. A few hours later, police cars surrounded the building. You won't believe what happened next. Please subscribe to the channel and let us know where you're listening in the comments. The morning had started like every other birthday for the past 28 years. I woke at 5:30, the same time I'd risen every day since Kevin was born, and drove across town to his penthouse with a carefully wrapped gift tucked under my arm. The wrapping paper was last year's Christmas paper. I'd saved it, smoothed out the creases, and folded it with the same care I'd once used to tuck him into bed. The gift inside was something I'd made myself. A wooden picture frame, hand-carved with his initials, holding our favorite photo from when he was 7 years old, gap-toothed and grinning after losing his first tooth. I'd written a note on the back in my careful handwriting. To my son, my greatest achievement. Happy 28th birthday. All my love, Dad. The elevator ride to his penthouse felt longer than usual. My reflection in the polished steel doors showed everything I'd tried to hide. The frayed edges of my 15-year-old jacket, the scuffs on my work boots that no amount of polish could erase, the calloused hands that had built everything Kevin now owned. I smoothed down my gray hair and straightened my shoulders. Today was his day. The penthouse door was already unlocked when I arrived, Kevin's way of avoiding having to greet me personally. Inside, the space gleamed with marble surfaces and floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the city. $8,400 a month for this view, and I'd paid every cent of it. The custom birthday cake sat on the kitchen island, an elaborate creation that cost more than I spent on groceries in a month. 28 candles stood at perfect attention, waiting to be lit. Kevin emerged from his bedroom, adjusting his Armani tie with practiced movements. The suit was new. I could tell by the way the fabric caught the light, still holding the sharp lines of the tailor's press. $3,000, minimum. His Rolex caught the morning sun streaming through the windows, the watch I'd bought him for his law school graduation gleaming gold against his wrist. $15,000 I'd saved for 2 years to afford. "You're early," he said without looking at me, his attention focused on his reflection in the hallway mirror. "I wanted to light the candles before you left for work," I replied, setting my humble gift on the counter next to the elaborate cake. The contrast was stark. My recycled wrapping paper and handmade frame looked shabby against the marble and designer everything that filled his life. Kevin finally turned, and for a moment I thought I saw something soften in his expression. Then his gaze fell on my gift, and his mouth tightened almost imperceptibly. "Dad, we need to talk." The words hung in the air between us like a blade waiting to fall. I'd heard those words before, 3 years ago when he'd told me he didn't want me at his Harvard graduation because I'd embarrass him in front of his classmates. 2 years ago he asked me to stop visiting his office because my appearance didn't fit the firm's image. Last year, when he'd started referring to me as just Thomas instead of Dad when introducing me to his friends. But today felt different. Today felt final. "Of course, son. What's on your mind?" I asked, though something deep in my chest already knew I didn't want to hear the answer. Kevin straightened his tie one final time, his movements sharp and decisive. When he looked at me, his eyes held the cold professionalism he reserved for difficult clients. "Dad, honestly, the best present you could give me would be if you disappeared from my life forever." The words hit me like a physical blow, but I kept my face steady. 28 years of fatherhood had taught me to absorb pain without flinching, to smile through the hurt for his sake. So I smiled. I walked over to him, placed my hands on his shoulders, feeling how he stiffened under my touch, and kissed his forehead the same way I had when he was sick with fever as a child. "I understand," I whispered against his hair. Then I turned and walked toward the door, leaving my gift on the counter, leaving the candles unlit, leaving behind the last thread that connected us. But as my hand touched the doorknob, something inside me shifted. A clarity I hadn't felt in years settled over my shoulders like an old, familiar coat. Kevin wanted me to disappear. After 28 years of sacrifice, of giving him everything I had and everything I was, He wanted me gone. Well then, it was time he learned exactly what would disappear when I did. The betrayal cut deeper than any physical wound I'd ever felt. 28 years of putting him first, of sacrificing my own comfort, my own dreams, my own dignity, and this was how he repaid me. Not just with indifference, but with active cruelty. He didn't just want me out of his life. He wanted me to vanish as if I'd never existed at all. But as I stood there in the marble-floored penthouse that my construction wages had paid for, surrounded by luxury I'd funded but could never afford for myself, something crystallized in my mind. Kevin had made his choice. He'd drawn his line. He wanted to pretend he was self-made, wanted to erase the father who'd made his entire existence possible. Fine, let's see how self-made he really was when every support I'd provided was stripped away. I pulled out my phone as the elevator descended, scrolling through contacts I hadn't called in months. The first number I dialed was Patrick Ross, my accountant. The second was Detective Lauren Garcia, an old friend from my construction days who now worked in financial crimes. The third was the law firm's HR department. 67 minutes. That's how long it would take for Kevin's world to collapse completely. And for the first time in 28 years, I was looking forward to his birthday. The memories came flooding back as I sat in my truck outside Kevin's building, watching the morning rush hour traffic blur past. 28 years of birthdays, and I could remember every single one. The first birthday after Sarah died, when Kevin was 20 and home from Harvard for winter break. I'd tried to make his favorite chocolate cake from scratch, burning it so badly the smoke alarm wouldn't stop shrieking. Kevin had laughed then, actually laughed, and helped me scrape the charred remains into the garbage before we ordered pizza and ate it straight from the box. When did that boy disappear? When had he been replaced by this stranger in designer suits who looked at me like I was something stuck to his shoe? The phone buzzed in my hand. Patrick Ross, my accountant, called back faster than I'd expected. "Thomas, I pulled all the files you requested. Are you absolutely sure about this? Once we start this process, there's no going back." "I'm sure, Patrick. How long will it take?" "Give me 90 minutes to file the paperwork. The bank will freeze the accounts immediately. The lease terminations will be effective by the end of business today." I ended the call and leaned back against the worn fabric of my truck seat. The vehicle was 9 years old, bought when Kevin graduated law school 3 years ago. I'd planned to buy something newer once he was established in his career, once he didn't need my financial support anymore. That day had never come. Instead, Kevin's lifestyle had expanded to fill every dollar I could provide, and then some. The penthouse leases at $8,400 monthly. The Porsche lease at $1,200. His credit cards, all guaranteed by me, carried a balance that made my stomach turn. $45,000 in debt for dinners at restaurants I couldn't pronounce, watches that cost more than my annual salary, and gifts for girlfriends who barely acknowledged my existence. The worst part wasn't the money. It was the lie Kevin told himself and everyone else, that he was self-made, that his Harvard law degree and his junior associate position at Morrison, Klein & Associates were products of his own brilliance and determination. He'd never mentioned the 3 jobs I'd worked to pay his tuition. Never spoke of the nights I'd gone to bed hungry so he could have meal plan money. Never acknowledged that his first apartment deposit came from the sale of Sarah's engagement ring. My phone buzzed again. This time it was Detective Garcia. "Tom, it's Lauren. I looked into that corporate credit card situation you mentioned. You were right. The charges you documented constitute clear fraud. We've been building a case for the past 2 weeks. 2 weeks? Ever since Patrick sent us those financial records you authorized. Your son has been living well beyond his means, and the firm's corporate account has been picking up the slack. Cartier watches, Louis Vuitton luggage, dinners that cost more than most people make in a week. The partners at Morrison, Klein, are furious. They had no idea." I closed my eyes, seeing Kevin's face from this morning. The casual arrogance, the dismissive way he'd looked at my gift, the cold professionalism in his voice when he'd told me to disappear. What happens next? An arrest warrant was issued this morning. We're moving in 1 hour. The timeline was tightening faster than I'd anticipated. I scrolled through my contacts until I found the number I'd hoped never to use, Jessica Morrison, senior partner at Kevin's firm. We'd met exactly once, at Kevin's hiring party 3 years ago. She'd been polite but distant, the way successful people are when they're humoring someone beneath their social station. Ms. Morrison, this is Thomas Price, Kevin Price's father. I have some information about corporate credit card fraud that I believe requires immediate attention. The conversation lasted exactly 4 minutes. By the end, Jessica Morrison's voice had gone from politely confused to coldly furious. Kevin would be terminated within the hour, his access to the building revoked, his belongings packed into a cardboard box and escorted to the street by security. I started the truck and began the drive back across town to my neighborhood, the one Kevin was ashamed to visit. The houses here were smaller, older, built by men like me who worked with their hands and took pride in honest labor. My own house was a modest 2-bedroom I'd bought when Kevin was 15 after years of saving every penny I could scrape together. It wasn't much, but it was mine, paid for with overtime hours and weekend construction jobs. The contrast with Kevin's world couldn't have been starker. While he lived in marble-countered luxury, I ate dinner off paper plates to save money on utilities for washing dishes. While he drove a Porsche, I nursed my aging truck through another year of repairs because a car payment would mean less money to send him. While he wore suits that cost more than my monthly mortgage, I patched holes in work shirts until the fabric gave up entirely. Those 3 jobs during his Harvard years nearly broke me. Construction during the day, loading trucks at the warehouse from 6 to midnight, then weekend shifts cleaning office buildings downtown. 18-hour days, 7 days a week, for 4 straight years. I'd come home at 2 in the morning, sleep for 3 hours, then get up and do it all again. My hands were permanently stained with concrete dust and cleaning chemicals. My back ached so badly some mornings I could barely stand upright. But I'd told myself it was worth it. Every sacrifice, every sleepless night working triple shifts, every meal skipped to afford his law school textbooks, it was all worth it because Kevin was going to have the life I'd never been able to give Sarah. He was going to be successful, respected, and financially secure. He was going to have everything. What I hadn't expected was that having everything would turn him into someone who had nothing but contempt for the man who'd given it to him. My phone rang as I pulled into my driveway. Kevin's name flashed on the screen, and for a moment my heart jumped. Maybe he'd reconsidered his words this morning. Maybe he'd called to apologize, to take it back, to ask me to come light those birthday candles after all. "Dad?" His voice was tight, controlled, but I could hear something underneath it. Fear. "Hello, Kevin. There's been some kind of mistake. The firm just fired me. They're saying I committed corporate fraud, but that's impossible. They're saying you provided evidence against me." I sat in my truck, looking at the house I'd bought with honest money, earned through honest work, and felt something cold and final settle in my chest. "No mistake, son." "What do you mean, no mistake?" "Dad, you have to fix this. Call them back. Tell them you were wrong. Tell them..." "Tell them what, Kevin? That the Cartier watch on your wrist wasn't purchased with the company credit card? That the Louis Vuitton luggage in your closet was paid for with your salary? That the $12,000 dinners you've been charging to corporate accounts were legitimate business expenses?" The silence stretched between us like a chasm. "You've been spying on me. I've been paying attention. For 28 years, I've been paying attention while you pretended I didn't exist. While you told people you were self-made. While you spent money you didn't earn and lived a life you couldn't afford. Dad, please. We can work this out. I'll pay back every penny, I swear. Just call them back." "It's too late for that, Kevin. You wanted me to disappear, remember? Well, let's see what happens when I do." I hung up and sat in the silence of my driveway, watching the afternoon shadows grow longer across my modest lawn. In less than an hour, Kevin would lose his job, his apartment, his car, and quite possibly his freedom. Everything he thought he'd built, everything he'd used to justify looking down on me, was about to crumble. And for the first time in years, I felt completely at peace. The phone rang again. This time, I didn't answer. 3 hours later, after making all the necessary phone calls, filing the paperwork with Patrick, and setting everything in motion, I found myself standing outside Kevin's penthouse building again. A small crowd had gathered on the sidewalk. Neighbors, curious passers-by, and a few people I recognized as Kevin's friends from previous birthday parties. The repo truck was already there, its driver inspecting Kevin's Porsche with the methodical efficiency of someone who'd done this countless times before. But it was the police presence that made my chest tighten with the gravity of what was happening. 4 patrol cars had surrounded the building, their red and blue lights painting the marble facade in rotating colors. 2 officers stood at each entrance, and I could see more positioned around the back of the building through the glass lobby. I checked my watch. The timing had worked out perfectly, all the pieces falling into place as Detective Garcia had promised when I'd called her that morning. The building's doorman, Marcus, caught my eye and nodded grimly. We'd spoken many times over the years during my visits to Kevin. He was a good man, working 2 jobs to support his own family, and he understood the value of honest work, unlike some people. "Mr. Price," Marcus called out softly, gesturing toward the police cars. "They surrounded the whole block about 10 minutes ago. Your son's upstairs. Been making quite a bit of noise since they arrived." Through the building's glass facade, I could see the elevator indicator climbing steadily toward the penthouse floor. Detective Garcia and her partner, no doubt. The pieces were falling into place exactly as planned, but seeing the full scope of the police response made it real in a way I hadn't anticipated. My phone buzzed with the text from Kevin. "Dad, please come up. We need to talk. I'm sorry about this morning." Too little, too late. But curiosity got the better of me. I wanted to see his face when reality finally crashed down around him. I wanted to witness the moment when the boy who'd told me to disappear realized exactly what he was losing. The elevator ride to the penthouse felt different this time. Where this morning I'd been nervous, apologetic, hoping for scraps of affection from my own son, now I felt calm, centered, in control. The penthouse door stood slightly ajar. Voices drifted from inside. Kevin's, higher pitched than usual, and 2 others I didn't recognize. The police, most likely. I pushed the door open and stepped into chaos. Kevin stood in the center of his marble-floored living room, his perfect hair disheveled, his expensive suit wrinkled from stress. His hands gestured frantically as he spoke to Detective Garcia and her partner, a tall man with kind eyes who introduced himself as Detective Morrison. "There has to be some mistake," Kevin was saying, his voice cracking slightly. "My father, he's confused, maybe having some kind of breakdown. The corporate card charges were approved by my supervisor. I have emails, I have documentation." "Mr. Price," Detective Garcia interrupted gently, "we've reviewed all the documentation. The charges in question were never approved for personal use. Your firm has provided us with complete records." That's when Kevin saw me standing in the doorway. His face went through a series of expressions: relief, hope, anger, and finally something that looked like recognition. For the first time in years, he was really seeing me. Not the embarrassing old man who wore cheap clothes and worked with his hands, but the person who'd made his entire lifestyle possible. "Dad," he said, and his voice was smaller now, more like the boy I remembered. "Please tell them this is all a misunderstanding." I walked into the room, my work boots quiet against the marble floor. The afternoon light streaming through those floor-to-ceiling windows caught the dust motes floating in the air, making everything look ephemeral, temporary. Which I supposed it was. "Officers," I said, nodding to the detectives. "I'm Thomas Price. I believe you have some questions about financial irregularities?" Detective Garcia pulled out a folder thick with papers. "Mr. Price, thank you for providing the documentation that helped us build this case. The evidence of corporate credit card fraud is quite substantial." "Fraud?" Kevin's voice went up an octave. "Dad, what documentation? What are they talking about?" I looked at my son, really looked at him, for the first time in years. The expensive suit couldn't hide the weak set to his shoulders. The designer watch couldn't disguise the way his hands trembled. The perfectly styled hair couldn't mask the reality of what he'd become. "Kevin," I said quietly, "show them the watch." "What watch?" "Dad, what's going on?" "The Cartier watch, the one you bought 3 months ago." Show them the receipt." Kevin's face went pale. That was a gift. From Olivia." Detective Morrison consulted his notes. "Mr. Price, we have the credit card records. Cartier Beverly Hills, March 15th, $8,200. Charged to Morrison, Klein & Associates corporate account, signed by Kevin Price." The silence in the room was deafening. Through the windows, I could hear the sounds of the city below. Traffic, construction, life moving forward. But in this marble monument to excess, time seemed suspended. "The luggage, too," I continued. "Louis Vuitton, $4,000. The dinners at Nobu, at the French Laundry, at 11 Madison Park. $12,000 in restaurant bills over 6 months, all charged to the firm's account, all for personal use." "How do you know all this?" Kevin whispered. I pulled out my own folder, thinner than the detective's, but just as damning. "Because I've been keeping track, son. For 6 months, ever since you told me to stop embarrassing you at your office Christmas party. I hired a private investigator to document your spending patterns. I wanted to understand how a junior associate making $85,000 a year could afford a lifestyle that costs over $200,000 annually." Kevin staggered backward, his hand finding the arm of his leather couch for support. "You've been spying on me? Your own son?" "I've been protecting myself," I replied calmly, "and protecting the firm that trusted you. Did you really think nobody would notice? That you could keep charging personal expenses to corporate accounts indefinitely?" The fight seemed to go out of him all at once. His shoulders sagged, and for a moment I saw the little boy who used to climb into my lap when he had nightmares. But that boy was gone, replaced by this stranger who'd learned to take without giving, to consume without creating, to demand without appreciating. Detective Garcia stepped forward. "Kevin Price, you're under arrest for corporate credit card fraud. You have the right to remain silent." As the Miranda rights continued, Kevin's eyes found mine across the room. "Dad, please, don't let them do this. I'm your son." The words hung in the air between us. "I'm your son." The same words he'd used as a child when he'd broken something valuable, when he'd disappointed me, when he'd needed forgiveness. But we weren't in our modest kitchen anymore, and he wasn't a child learning right from wrong. He was a grown man who'd made his choices. "Yes," I said softly, "you are my son, and this morning you told me the best gift I could give you was to disappear from your life forever." The handcuffs clicked into place with a sound like a closing door. Outside, I could hear the Porsche's engine starting as the repo truck driver prepared to take it away. The doorman would be fielding questions from neighbors. The local news might even pick up the story. Local attorney arrested for corporate fraud. But none of that mattered anymore. What mattered was the way Kevin looked at me as Detective Garcia led him toward the door, not with anger or defiance, but with something approaching understanding. For the first time in years, he was seeing the full cost of his choices, and I was finally ready to let him pay for it. The elevator doors closed on Kevin's face, pale and shocked behind Detective Garcia's shoulder. I stood alone in the penthouse that had become a crime scene, listening to the echo of handcuffs and footsteps fade down the corridor. Through the floor-to-ceiling windows, I watched the police car pull away from the curb, my son's silhouette barely visible in the back seat. Patrick Ross appeared in the doorway, briefcase in hand, and papers under his arm. My accountant looked grimmer than I'd ever seen him in 20 years of doing business together. "It's done, Thomas," he said, setting his briefcase on the marble counter where Kevin's birthday cake still sat, untouched and somehow obscene in its elaborate perfection. "The lease termination is effective immediately. The building management has been notified. Kevin has until 6 p.m. to collect personal belongings, escorted by security." I nodded, walking to the windows that overlooked the city Kevin had thought he conquered. Below, the repo truck was loading the Porsche onto its flatbed. A small crowd of neighbors still lingered on the sidewalk, their phones out, recording everything for social media. Kevin's downfall would be public, documented, permanent. "Credit cards?" I asked. "Frozen as of noon today. Outstanding balance of $47,812. The bank will pursue collection through normal channels." Patrick paused, consulting his notes. "Thomas, are you sure about the penthouse donation? Once you sign these papers, It's irrevocable." I took the papers from his hands, scanning the legal language that would transfer ownership of Kevin's home to the downtown women's shelter. Sarah had volunteered there before she got sick. She'd always said that helping people who'd lost everything was the most important work anyone could do. "I'm sure," I said, signing my name with the same care I'd once used to sign Kevin's school permission slips. My phone buzzed with a text message. Not from Kevin this time, but from Olivia White, his girlfriend. The message was short. "Mr. Price, I'm sorry about everything. Kevin told me what he said to you this morning. He doesn't deserve your kindness, but I hope someday he'll understand what he's lost." Another message followed from someone I didn't recognize. "Just saw the news about your son. Good for you for standing up to him. My dad would never have had the courage." The news was spreading faster than I'd anticipated. In the age of social media, Kevin's arrest hadn't just been witnessed by a handful of neighbors. It was being broadcast to the world. His mugshot would be online within hours. His name would be associated with corporate fraud for anyone who cared to search for it. The building manager, Mrs. Williams, knocked on the open door. "Mr. Price, I have the keys to the storage unit downstairs, your son's belongings, the one security packed from his office. They're already there. The movers will handle the furniture tomorrow." I looked around the penthouse one last time. The marble countertops where Kevin had eaten breakfast that morning. The leather furniture he'd never paid for. The abstract art on the walls that cost more than most people's cars. None of it had made him happy. None of it had made him kind. "Mrs. Williams, there's something I need you to understand," I said. "My son told me this morning that he wanted me to disappear from his life. These consequences, the arrest, losing the apartment, everything, they're not about revenge. They're about teaching him that actions have costs." She nodded, her expression sympathetic. "My own son is about Kevin's age. Sometimes the hardest thing about loving someone is letting them face the consequences of their choices." The elevator ride down felt like descending from a dream into reality. In the lobby, I passed the wall of mailboxes where Kevin's name was already being scraped off with a razor blade. Efficient, final. Outside, the crowd had thinned, but a few stragglers remained. A young woman with a news camera approached me as I walked toward my truck. "Sir, are you Thomas Price? Can you comment on your son's arrest?" I stopped, considering her question. 6 months ago, even 6 hours ago, I would have hurried away, embarrassed by the attention, ashamed that my family's problems were becoming public spectacle. But now, standing in the afternoon sunlight with my conscience clear for the first time in years, I felt different. "My son made choices," I said quietly. "Today he learned that choices have consequences. That's all any parent can hope for. But you're the one who provided evidence against him. How does that feel?" The question hung in the air between us. How did it feel? I thought of Kevin as a little boy, crying when he fell off his bicycle. I thought of him at 18, proud and defiant when he left for Harvard. I thought of him this morning, cold and dismissive as he told me to disappear. "It feels like doing the right thing," I said finally, "even when the right thing is the hardest thing." I climbed into my truck and drove away, leaving the reporter and the cameras and the remnants of Kevin's old life behind. But I didn't drive home. Instead, I found myself at Sunset Memorial Cemetery, where Sarah had been buried 8 years ago. Her gravestone was simple granite, inscribed with her name and the dates that bracketed a life cut too short. I sat on the small bench I'd installed beside her grave and told her about Kevin's birthday, about his arrest, about the choice I'd had to make. "I think I failed him, Sarah," I said to the gathering dusk. "I gave him everything he wanted, but I never taught him to want the right things. I made his life so easy that he never learned how to struggle, never learned how to appreciate what he had." The wind rustled through the oak tree that shaded her grave, and for a moment I could almost hear her voice. "You gave him love, Thomas. That's not failing. What he did with that love was his choice." My phone rang, interrupting the quiet. Detective Garcia's number appeared on the screen. "Thomas, I wanted to update you. Kevin made bail an hour ago. Someone posted the $50,000. I frowned. "Someone? Who?" "I'm not supposed to tell you this, but it was his girlfriend." Olivia White. She used her savings account. The irony was bitter. Even now, even after his arrest and public humiliation, Kevin was still living off someone else's money, still taking without giving, still unable to stand on his own 2 feet. "There's something else," Detective Garcia continued. "Kevin's asking to see you. He's been granted supervised release pending trial, but he has conditions: no contact with his former employer, surrender of his passport, and he has to check in twice weekly. He says he needs to talk to you." I closed my eyes, feeling the weight of 28 years of fatherhood settling on my shoulders like a familiar burden. Part of me, the part that had changed 1,000 diapers and attended 100 school plays, wanted to run to him, to fix this mess the way I'd fixed every other problem in his life. But another part of me, the part that had grown stronger over the past 6 months of watching him spiral into entitled selfishness, knew better. "Tell him I'll think about it," I said, and hung up. The cemetery was quiet now, settled into the peaceful hush of evening. I sat beside Sarah's grave until the stars came out, thinking about choices and consequences, about love and letting go, about the difference between helping someone and enabling them. When I finally drove home, I knew what I had to do. But first, Kevin would have to prove he was ready to hear it. 3 days passed before Kevin called again. 3 days during which I went to work at the construction site where I'd been employed for the past 15 years, framing houses for families who'd saved every penny for their down payments. 3 days of normal routine, of earned fatigue and honest sweat, while somewhere across town my son sat in a studio apartment he could barely afford, probably for the first time in his adult life, understanding what it meant to count dollars instead of spending them freely. When the call finally came, his voice sounded different, smaller, less certain. "Dad, it's Kevin. I was wondering if we could meet, just to talk." I was sitting in my kitchen, eating dinner off the same chipped plate I'd used for the past decade. The contrast with his former marble countertops wasn't lost on me. "Where are you living now?" "Olivia's letting me stay in her guest room, just temporarily, until I figure things out." Still dependent on someone else, still unable to stand completely alone. But there was something in his tone that hadn't been there during our last conversation, a humility I hadn't heard since he was young. "There's a diner on Fairfax Avenue," I said. "Murphy's. Do you know it?" No, I don't think so." Of course he didn't. Murphy's was the kind of place I'd eaten lunch at for years, where coffee cost $1.50 and the waitresses knew your name because you'd been coming there long enough to matter. Kevin's world had been 5-star restaurants and wine lists he couldn't pronounce. "Tomorrow, 7 p.m. And Kevin, come alone." Murphy's Diner at 7 on a Thursday evening was nearly empty. Just me, a trucker reading a newspaper at the counter, and Betty, the waitress who'd been serving coffee there since before Kevin was born. I ordered black coffee and waited, watching the door for a young man who might or might not still be my son. When Kevin walked in, I barely recognized him. Gone was the $3,000 suit, replaced by jeans and a plain white t-shirt that looked like they'd come from a discount store. His hair, usually perfectly styled, was uncombed and slightly too long, but it was his eyes that had changed the most. The casual arrogance was gone, replaced by something that looked almost like fear. He slid into the booth across from me, his movements uncertain. "Dad, thank you for meeting me." Betty approached with her order pad. "What can I get you, hun?" Kevin stared at the laminated menu as if it were written in a foreign language. What's good here?" "The meatloaf special's $5.95, Betty said kindly. "Comes with mashed potatoes and green beans." "That sounds fine. And coffee, please." After Betty left, silence stretched between us like a gulf neither of us knew how to cross. Kevin's hands fidgeted with a paper napkin, tearing small pieces off and arranging them on the table. It was something he'd done as a child when he was nervous. "I lost my job," he said finally. "Obviously, but they're not just pressing charges. The firm is suing me for restitution, civil court. They want every penny back, plus damages." "How much?" $78,000. His voice cracked slightly. My lawyer says I'll probably plea bargain to avoid prison time, but I'll have to pay it all back, plus court costs, plus his fees. I sipped my coffee, waiting. This wasn't an apology yet. This was still Kevin looking for someone else to fix his problems. Dad, I know I said some things the other day, on my birthday, things I didn't mean. Did you mean them at the time? The question caught him off guard. He stopped tearing the napkin, his hands going still. Yes, I think I did. I was angry about something stupid. Olivia had been nagging me about money, about how I spent too much, about how I never seemed grateful for anything, and when you showed up with that gift, that frame you made, you threw it away. I threw it away, he confirmed, his voice barely above a whisper. And I knew, even as I was doing it, that it was wrong. But I was so angry at feeling guilty all the time. Guilty about the money I was spending, guilty about lying to everyone about where it came from, guilty about being ashamed of my own father. Betty returned with Kevin's dinner, the plate generous and steaming. He stared at it as if he'd never seen food before. "When was the last time you ate?" I asked. "Yesterday, I think. Maybe the day before. I keep forgetting." He picked up his fork, then set it down again. "Dad, I don't know how to do this. I don't know how to live without everything you gave me. The apartment, the car, the credit cards. I applied for 15 jobs this week. 15, and nobody wants to hire someone with a pending fraud charge." "What kind of jobs?" "Law firms, corporate positions, places where I could use my Harvard degree." He finally took a bite of meatloaf, chewing slowly. "This is actually really good." "Kevin, you're not going to find work at law firms, not with a criminal record. You need to think about other options." "What other options? I went to Harvard Law School. I'm not going to work at McDonald's." And there it was. Even now, even after losing everything, Kevin still thought he was too good for honest work, still believed his education entitled him to skip the struggling that built character. "Why not?" I asked simply. He stared at me as if I'd suggested he rob a bank. Because I'm a lawyer. I have a degree from Harvard." "Your degree didn't stop you from committing fraud. Your education didn't teach you gratitude or humility or basic decency. Maybe it's time you learned those things a different way." Kevin's face flushed red. "So this is it? This is your big lesson? Your son loses everything and you tell him to flip burgers?" "I'm telling you to earn something, for the first time in your adult life. Do you know what I was doing when I was your age? Building houses. You've told me 1,000 times. I was building houses and raising a child and taking care of a sick wife, all on $30,000 a year, and I was grateful for every dollar because I knew what it took to earn it." Kevin pushed his plate away, his appetite apparently gone. "So you want me to suffer? You want me to be miserable because you were miserable? I want you to understand the value of things. I want you to know what it feels like to work for something instead of having it handed to you. I want you to become the man your mother thought you could be." The mention of Sarah hit him like a physical blow. His eyes filled with tears he tried to blink away. "Mom would hate what I've become, wouldn't she?" For the first time since he'd walked into the diner, Kevin looked like my son again. Not the entitled stranger who'd told me to disappear, but the boy who'd once climbed into my lap after nightmares and asked me to make everything better. "Your mother loved you unconditionally," I said gently. "But love doesn't mean enabling. Love sometimes means letting someone fall so they can learn to stand on their own." "I don't know how to stand on my own, Dad. I've never had to." "Then it's time you learned." Kevin wiped his eyes with the back of his hand, a gesture so familiar it took me back 20 years. "If I do this, if I try to start over, really start over, will you help me?" "What kind of help are you asking for?" "Not money. I know you won't give me money, but maybe guidance, advice? Maybe you could teach me how to live the way you do." I looked across the table at my son, seeing him clearly for perhaps the first time in years. He was broken, humbled, stripped of all the pretenses that had made him unbearable. But underneath all of that, maybe there was still someone worth saving. "I'll consider it," I said. "But first, you have to prove you're serious. Get a job, any job. Work for 30 days without complaining, without looking for something better, without asking anyone for money. Show me you can support yourself, even barely, then we'll talk." Kevin nodded slowly. "Any job. Any honest job. And after 30 days? After 30 days, if you've kept your word, I'll teach you everything I know about building a life instead of just living one." For the first time in our conversation, Kevin smiled. It was a small smile, uncertain and fragile, but it was real. "Deal, Dad." I signaled Betty for the check, but Kevin stopped me. "No, let me get this. It's probably one of the last meals I can afford for a while, but I want to pay for it myself." He pulled out a crumpled $20 bill, probably the last money he had to his name, and left it on the table with a generous tip Betty would appreciate. It was a small gesture, but it was his own. Maybe there was hope for us after all. 6 months later, I was installing kitchen cabinets in a new subdivision when my phone rang. The caller ID showed a number I didn't recognize, but the voice was familiar. "Dad, it's Kevin. I wanted to let you know I got promoted to shift supervisor at the warehouse. It comes with a 50-cent raise and health insurance." I set down my drill and stepped away from the job site, walking to where the morning sun painted the unfinished houses in shades of gold. "Congratulations. How do you feel about it?" "Tired," he laughed, and it was a sound I hadn't heard in years. Genuine, uncomplicated happiness. "My back aches every night, my hands are covered in cuts from the cardboard, and I smell like diesel fuel most of the time. But Dad, I earned this. Nobody gave it to me because of my last name or my connections. They promoted me because I show up early, stay late, and do good work." The transformation had been painful to watch at first. Kevin's initial job search had been humbling in ways I don't think he'd anticipated. Retail stores saw his Harvard degree and worried he'd quit the moment something better came along. Restaurants questioned why someone with his education wanted to bus tables. It had taken 3 weeks and dozens of rejections before he'd finally been hired at Morrison Logistics, no relation to his former law firm, loading trucks in their distribution center. The first few weeks had nearly broken him. I'd driven by the warehouse one evening after my own workday just to check on him, and saw him sitting in Olivia's car in the parking lot, crying from exhaustion and frustration. But he'd gotten up the next morning and gone back, and the morning after that, and the one after that. "Have you heard anything about the court case?" I asked. "Sentencing is next month. My lawyer thinks I'll get 2 years probation and community service. The restitution agreement is set up as a payment plan, $200 a month for the next 15 years. He paused. "It's going to take forever to pay back, but at least it's manageable now that I have steady work." $200 a month. In his old life, Kevin had spent more than that on a single dinner without thinking twice. Now it represented hours of honest labor, sweat earned through lifting boxes and organizing inventory. The weight of that debt would follow him for years, a constant reminder of what his choices had cost. "Dad, there's something else, something I wanted to tell you in person if you have time." We arranged to meet at Murphy's Diner again, the place that had become neutral ground for us. When I arrived, Kevin was already there, sitting in the same booth we'd occupied 6 months earlier. But the young man across from me bore little resemblance to the broken person I'd met that night. His hair was shorter, practical rather than styled. His clothes were clean but inexpensive, chosen for durability rather than fashion. Most importantly, his posture had changed. He sat straighter, more grounded, like someone who'd learned to carry his own weight. "I signed the lease on my own apartment yesterday," he said without preamble. "It's not much, a studio in East Hollywood, $600 a month, but it's mine. I can afford it with my warehouse salary, and I don't owe anyone anything for it." Betty approached our table with the coffee pot, filling our cups without being asked. She knew us both by name now, and had watched Kevin's gradual transformation over months of occasional visits. "That's wonderful, honey," she told Kevin. "Your dad must be proud." After she left, Kevin reached into his jacket and pulled out something wrapped in tissue paper. "I have something for you. It's not much, but I made it myself." Inside the tissue was a picture frame, roughly hewn from what looked like scrap wood. The craftsmanship was amateur but careful, each joint fitted with obvious attention to detail. Inside the frame was a photograph I'd never seen before. Kevin at age 7, the same gap-toothed grin from my original gift, but this picture showed both of us. I was kneeling beside his bicycle, one hand steadying him as he learned to ride, both of us laughing at some long-forgotten joke. "Where did you get this picture?" "I found it in Mom's old photo albums when I was cleaning out some boxes. I remembered that day. You spent 3 hours running beside me until I could balance on my own. I never thanked you for your patience." The frame was imperfect, the wood slightly uneven, the finish rough in places. But it had been made with his own hands, crafted during evenings after 12-hour shifts at the warehouse. It represented something money couldn't buy and privilege couldn't shortcut. "I also wanted to apologize," Kevin continued. "Not just for what I said on my birthday, but for everything. For taking your sacrifices for granted, for being ashamed of the work that paid for my education, for never saying thank you." I ran my fingers along the edge of the handmade frame, feeling the small imperfections that proved it was real, that it was his. "You don't need to apologize anymore, Kevin. You've already shown me you understand." I keep thinking about what you said that night, about learning to build a life instead of just living one. I'm starting to understand what you meant. What do you think I meant? Kevin considered the question, stirring sugar into his coffee with the slow deliberation of someone who'd learned that rushing led to mistakes. "I think you meant that everything worthwhile has to be earned. That taking shortcuts doesn't just cheat the system, it cheats you out of becoming the person you're supposed to be." Through the diner window I could see the sun setting over the city, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink. Somewhere out there was the penthouse Kevin used to call home, now housing families who'd lost everything and were working to rebuild. Somewhere out there was the law office where he'd once worked, where younger associates were learning the same lessons about ethics and consequences that Kevin had learned the hard way. "There's one more thing," Kevin said. "Olivia and I are getting married. Nothing fancy, just a small ceremony at City Hall. But I wanted to ask, would you walk me down the aisle? I know it's usually the bride's father, but I don't have anyone else I'd rather have beside me." The question caught me off guard. In Kevin's old world, I would have been an embarrassment at his wedding. My work clothes, my calloused hands, my unfamiliarity with five-star venues and designer everything would have made me a liability to his image. But that Kevin was gone, replaced by this young man who understood that a father's love wasn't measured in dollar amounts or social status. "I'd be honored," I said. We sat in comfortable silence for a while, watching the city light up as darkness fell. Kevin paid for our coffee again, counting out exact change from a handful of bills earned through honest work. As we prepared to leave, he stopped and looked at me seriously. "Dad, that morning when I told you to disappear, I was wrong. But maybe we both needed me to say it. Maybe we both needed to find out who we were when everything else was stripped away." I thought about that as I drove home to my small house, Kevin's handmade frame carefully secured on the passenger seat. Maybe he was right. Maybe sometimes love means letting someone fall far enough to discover they can stand on their own. Maybe sometimes the greatest gift you can give someone is the chance to earn their own self-respect. 3 months later, I walked Kevin down the aisle at a simple ceremony in the courthouse garden. Olivia wore a dress from a department store, Kevin wore a suit he'd bought with warehouse wages, and I wore the same tie I'd worn to his law school graduation. But this time, when he introduced me to his new colleagues and friends, there was pride in his voice. "This is my father, Thomas Price. He's the man who taught me everything I know about building something that lasts. The best gifts I've learned are the ones that teach us who we really are. And sometimes the greatest act of love is stepping back and letting someone discover their own strength." Kevin found him, and in doing so, he found his way back to being my son. If you enjoyed this story of redemption and second chances, please like this video and subscribe to our channel for more inspiring tales. Share your thoughts about family relationships and personal growth in the comments below. We love hearing from you. For another powerful story about family dynamics, click the video on your screen. Thank you for listening, and remember, sometimes the greatest gift is learning to give yourself a new beginning.